There we go. So we're starting a new recording. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen. But I need to share this one, I believe. Make sure that we have the correct one. Nope, that's not the one. My mistake. We're going to do a new share. This is the one, I believe. That's the one we want. Okay, so let me cancel this for right now. And hopefully everybody will see it. And I got to do another share because it's only sharing part of the screen. I want the whole screen to be shared. I want the whole desktop shared. There we go. Okay, so now the whole desktop should be shared. If anyone doesn't see this, please let me know. So where we ended up with this is and I gotta hide some things here so I can see what I'm doing, is that we ended up with a separate layer for corrections that I really didn't talk about much, but once we were done with some preliminary editing, okay, and then we were to open it up into Photoshop, and I made an adjustment layer here that was, for levels. And we also, on this corrections layer, we also got rid of some of her blemishes and the little nose, wasn't a nose ring, but a little nose gem, that sort of thing. Well, a couple of the other things that they want us to do in here is to use the dodge and burn tool, as well as the sponge tool, which is for increasing or decreasing the intensity of the color. So if I look over to the left in my tool panel, when we look here, we can click, you can see that we have the dodge tool, we have the burn tool, and we have the sponge tool. The dodge tool, what it does is it will typically lighten areas and shadowed areas in the shadows. The burn tool does just the opposite. It will darken areas. And then the sponge tool, you can either saturate areas or you can desaturate them. So if we start with the dodge tool, when we go to the top, now I set mine way down because I'm working on a laptop. I don't have, I have a Wacom tablet, but I'm just using my touchpad right now. And I'm focusing on highlights, but you'll notice if I click on this little button up above, it's dropped down. I can focus on highlights, midtones, or shadows. I just want to focus on highlights. I'm turning the exposure way down. And what I did over here in her brow region, just below her brow, is I accentuated the highlights a little bit. So watch if I really go overboard. See how it really it really lightens that area up? Well, I don't want that quite so much, just a little bit, okay? So if you need to turn down your exposure even more, then try that, okay? And then the next thing that they want us to do, so we did it here underneath her eyebrow, her left eyebrow, and a little bit over here on her right eyebrow. The other thing that they want us to do is to saturate her eyes a little bit more so it brings out more of the blue in the iris. And then in the sclera, I believe that's the sclera, the white area, we wanted to desaturate that a little bit so that it gets a little bit whiter. So in that particular instance now, we would use the sponge tool, okay? And you'll notice at the very top again, under the settings for the sponge tool, we can desaturate or saturate. So if I zoom in here a little bit, and we look at her eye, and I'm gonna make the brush a little bit bigger, okay? And again, I'm turning the flow down a bit, but 50% is okay. I'm gonna go ahead and really crank this up a bit. And you can see that her eye, the iris is getting much bluer. Not a lot, but just enough to bring out the blueness of her eyes a little bit more. Then likewise, we're gonna use the same tool and we're gonna make it a little bit smaller. We wanna take out some of the redness of her eyes and that sort of thing. So instead of using saturate, we're going to use desaturate and come back in here and just get some of that redness out. So again, we've made some minor but important improvements. Now we just have a couple more things to do and we're done with this. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do after that, I'm going to look to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything, is we're going to adjust the skin tones. So what I want to do on the corrections layer is that I'm going to select, make sure that this is a separate layer from the background layer, because if I turn the background layer on, I turn that on, notice that there's subtle little differences now. Notice that the decoration in her nose and her freckles and stuff become more prominent. And notice the highlights that I created in beneath her eyebrows and her eyes and that sort of thing. When I click on and off, you can really see the difference in her eyes. I probably overdid it a bit with her eyes, but that's okay for right now. Okay. But what we want to do now is that we want to adjust her skin tones a little bit. So where we do that is we go under select, and we're going to go to color range right here, and a little window pops up. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to select skin tones instead of just specific colors. You want to select skin tones. Okay, detect faces. So that will again further focus on the areas that we want to change. We're going to adjust the fuzziness to about 10. How do we know that? Because the book tells us. Otherwise, you have to play with this yourself. You know, 10 is a good region. If it's too low, you don't get anything. If it's too high, it covers too much of her. We just want to focus on the skin tones and that's it. So that tells you pretty much the area that we're focusing on right there. Whoops, let me go ahead and put that in by my hand, dial that in. Okay, so when we have that, it's going to adjust the color range a little bit. And with that selected, just those areas, now we can come back in and we can go into the curves adjustment for this area. So with this part selected, I can go into curves. So I'm going to go back into adjustments, select curves. And what I want to do is I want to drop it down just a little bit, just a tad. But again, if you exaggerate it, notice that it blows it out. Actually, for a poster or a fine art piece, this could look really cool. But we don't want to do that. And if you put it in the other range, it makes her look pretty strange. That could be an interesting solution too. We just want minimal adjustments. Okay. Now I can go back and I can deselect. So that's really pretty much all I wanted to do. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take here, let's make sure that it's deselected again. I'm going to copy the corrections layer and we're going to blur part of her face just a little bit. Not a lot, but just a little, and then we're going to tone it back to smooth her skin out. And again, this is something that if you overdo it, it looks pretty unnatural, but I guess, you know, to make men and women, middle-aged and older, look a little bit more youthful, but not too young, and to smooth out some of the wrinkles. This is one of the ways of doing that, of just blurring it. So I'm going to take the color corrections here, and I'm going to make a copy of the layer. So everybody should know that's Command J. And what I want to do is I'm going to go up to the filter, and under blur, what I want to do is I want to use surface blur. And we're going to crank it up to maybe 10 levels here. Let's see, wait a minute. Radius, no, I'm sorry. Radius maybe 5 pixels. No, not so much. I'll type it in. Having trouble with my touchpad here. So that's 5 levels. Okay, so the radius of that, and then move the threshold to 10 levels. So we're going to change the threshold to 10. Okay, and it will blur pretty much everything. It's very subtle, but if I zoom in a little bit, okay, and I turn that off, you see, does everybody see how her pores are becoming more pronounced when I turn that off? And now when I turn it on, it's probably a little bit too much. Okay, so now what I can do is we can dial this back. So we're going to change the opacity of this layer to 40%. And again, you know how much? That's something that you would want to zoom in and you would want to play with a little bit, but we're relying on the book to tell us that we want 40%. And then we don't want her eyes to be blurred. Those regions in there. So what we're going to do on that area, on this layer, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the eraser tool over here. So I'm going to go under, let's see, there's the eraser tool right here. And just again, on that layer, I need to make that brush a little bit bigger. We're just going to erase in here, blurring around her eyes. Okay, and again, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see the final results. And it's very subtle. See that when I turn it off, you can see the pores in her freckles and that sort of thing, much more pronounced. When I turn it on, it's just removed it just a little bit, just enough. So now we have a pretty nice finished version of this that I'll go ahead and I'll save. This is my working file. And I'm done. We've taken a very good photograph and made it better. Okay, not overdoing it, because as I said, if you remove too many freckles, too many blemishes, that sort of thing, that looks really unnatural. If you smooth out the skin too much, then, excuse me, they look like a corpse. So that makes, you know, for a strange appearance. So that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Or actually, no. I just want to pause the video is what I want to do. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Okay. And I'm going to pause recording.